Greetings, Wheel of Time fans. This is going to be a review of episode 5 of season 2 of the TV show of the Wheel of Time, and I gotta say, this is one of the best episodes to date. It might be my favorite that I have seen so far across the entire series. That doesn't mean that there aren't problems in the episode. Every TV show out there has some things that happen that viewers scratch their head at a little bit, but this episode was less frustrating to watch than other episodes, especially if you are a fan of the books. Part of what makes this episode work is that it feels like it is driven by real tension. In every scene, or most scene, the stakes are clearer than they have been in previous episodes. I know what is driving the characters. It's not the same as what is driving them in the plot of the book, but it's enjoyable to watch, even where I disagreed with certain choices. The episode has a shape to it. It's not just a bunch of scenes that are strung together that eventually lead to some kind of conclusion. We are getting to understand our antagonists, what they want, and how that obstructs what our protagonist wants. That tension is what shapes a story. That being said, this episode is not a total course correction. The main characters are still more insufferable versions of the characters that they are in the books, and Moiraine and Ran in particular are still pretty unlikable to me. There are also plot wobbles as well as world-building issues and logic challenges, which I will point out, but overall this is a better episode, and if the entire series had been more like this episode, I think book readers would have had less to complain about. Book readers will still have to decode changes made to the lore as well as the sequence of events in the plot, but they weren't as annoying. The problems are less crucial to the overall story and are more of a, okay, I guess this is going to be a CW quality show, which has already been pointed out and isn't changed by this episode, but overall is still more enjoyable once you know what you're in for. In other words, this is an episode that you can watch with other people who have read the books and people who have not read the books, and say, you know, there are differences, but I still liked it. So with that being said, let's now dive into the episode scene by scene and provide some commentary on what worked, what didn't, and what predictions we have for the future. In the opening scene of this episode, the High Lady Suroth is brought before the High Lord Turak and is admonished for her raid on the village where the Shinarans and the Ogier were captured. What I liked about this scene is it showed that that was something that the Seanchan haven't typically done in their invasion so far. And I do like that the costumes are outlandish and vibrant and colorful. However, there are places where it's just a little bit much in terms of how weird they are, and the very, very long fingernails is one of those things for me. I like that the fingernails are maybe slightly exaggerated from how they are in the books, but it seems like the entire reason to make them like several feet long is so they can have the scene of the High Lady Suroth kneeling and then having a sword chop the fingernails off with this decree that this has mean that she's been admonished among the Seanchan. However, I'm not sure what the material consequences for her are other than losing her fingernails and what that tactically means for her position. So it was kind of a showy display of lost status, which this show seems to think that people need in order to understand what is going on. And maybe that's true. Maybe show audience need giant rings and giant nails and color-coded wardrobes and all of these things in order to piece together the intricacies of the world building in order for the concepts to get across. It's hard to answer that without knowing how it would have been perceived if it was played more straight, like it is in the books, but at times it does feel a little over the top to the point of being absurd, and the length of these fingernails to me is one of those things. What I also disliked about this scene was how the High Lady Suroth was imperious with the High Lord Turak one minute and then groveling the next. And I understand that she was taking a gambit by telling him that he was wrong and was trying to save face because she had to do this thing based on Ishmael's order, which we learn in a later scene. But it was awkward in this scene and didn't communicate the way that the Seanchan react with each other within the ranks that they have. At least I thought it was kind of confusing because she's one moment imperious, the next minute groveling and kneeling to have her fingernails chopped off, and we also have these foreigners mixed in with the crowd with Ishmael just allowed to be there, and then Fane also strolling up between the ranks of the Seanchan, carrying the Horn of Valir, which Turok doesn't seem to take as amiss at all, at least in that moment. Now, I do know that there's another scene that comes up later where he confronts Ishmael about his weird role within the Seanchan, which I'll cover when we get to that scene, but just as a whole, I don't think that this opening scene communicates well how the caste system and ranking system within the Seanchan works. I also don't like how the Horn of Valir just seems to be a MacGuffin in a box. It hasn't gotten a lot of explanation. There's been a little bit, and we get a little bit more with Turok saying, with this, the whole world will be ours, but it's not really clear why he thinks he needs the Horn of Valir or what role that will play in the Seanchan invasion. In the books, the Seanchan believed that their ownership of this land was their right, and they came with the Forerunners certain that they would be victorious and did not need a magical item to accomplish that. So this is being rewritten in the books. The Forsaken are much more intricately part of the reason for the Seanchan invasion, which is covered later. And I don't like it as well, but as far as being an alternative telling of the story, it was okay. Again, I feel like this episode overall provides more of a shape to the story than other episodes have, and at least I understand the tensions that are taking place right now. So then we have a scene with Rand and Moiraine trying to outrun Lanfear, and this scene was legitimately scary. Giving the Forsaken the ability to regenerate and self-heal and resurrect themselves in the TV show does make them seem like more formidable foes who can take on a more personal role in the kinds of chaos that they are trying to cause within the world. Now, how that actually ends up working out remains to be seen, and I will hold some commentary on that until we get at least to the end of the season, but it was legitimately scary, and I do think that adds tension to the show as well as making it enjoyable to watch. I did think it was a little funny when after, totally recovering from being stabbed through the heart and slashed through the throat, Lanfear pauses to put on her coat because she might be a little chilly outside in the dark. I also noted that it was a dark and stormy night, but it was one with no rain. Rand and Moiraine are running through the forest. Rand wants to know what's going on. Moiraine is explaining that, Lanfear is a very scary monster that is chasing them, and she'll explain later, but for now, they just have to escape. They happen upon this farm, and Moiraine does this thing where she, takes two of the horses, tells the woman who is managing the farm that she has to come with them, and then kills the fourth horse so that Lanfear cannot chase after them. I did not think that this was in character for the book version of Moiraine, but show version of Moiraine was able to justify letting the Terran fairy guy drown himself in the water, so I guess it's in character for her. It doesn't make me like her more, and I think the show writers think that this makes her likable because she's able to make tough choices. But to me, this was not really justified, especially as Lanfear shows up a minute later and is able to commandeer a horse really easily. They also don't really know what powers she has. It's very possible that she doesn't need a horse in order to chase them. So I'm not really sure, what it is that Moiraine thinks she can and cannot do. And then when Lanfear does follow behind them and this, old man shows up out of nowhere on the horse conveniently that she needs, she asks, where does this road go? Which I thought was funny because she spent so much time trying to convince Rand that this was the location that her family, traveled to in order to go on vacation, all these things, and it sounds like she doesn't actually know herself anything about this location. That makes me wonder how she even found this little cabin and why she thought this would be a good place to take Rand in order to do this reveal, but that's okay. What I liked is that the character of Lanfear is coming off much more imposing and interesting than she was previously in the season. Now that we have dropped the facade of Selene, I'm liking this character a lot more, especially if you consider that they are combining the characters of Lanfear and Semirog into one Forsaken, which I do think that they are doing. Of course, book readers are going to laugh about that a little bit since those two characters in the book lore hate each other, but they do have to reduce the number of characters, and if you think of Lanfear and Semirog as one character, a lot of the previous scenes from this season that were bothering me as out of character for Lanfear don't bother me as much, because you're going to bring in some of those sadistic and abusive character traits that Semirog portrays, and combine them with some of the character traits that Lanfear has, and that creates this new character which in that vein, I think this actress is portraying very well. We then have a scene with Elias and Perrin, where Perrin finally realizes that Elias is taking him in the opposite direction that he thought, and finally pieces together that Elias doesn't care about the Shinarans, which to me was obvious in a previous episode, but Perrin's with it now. They have a little bit of a confrontation about who Perrin's pack is, and he disagrees with Elias that he is meant for the wilderness and instead decides to go back towards the town and figure out how he can help. This scene was perfectly fine. I do think the wolves look not like wolves, because they're not wolves, they're dogs, but they're very cute, and it is fun to see Hopper in the TV show, especially if you are somebody who likes the character of Hopper in the books. I'm kind of ambivalent on Hopper personally, but he is a very good boy. So it is nice to see that piece of Perrin's character coming into fruition as he finally starts to make some decisions for himself in this episode. We then return to Lanfear chasing Moiraine and Lan, and we see Lanfear whipping her horse with a lash of air as she's riding through the night chasing after her quarry, and she rides past, and the camera stays in one spot on this rock, and Rand and Moiraine emerge from behind it, and they slowly walk in the opposite direction and have a conversation about, tell me the truth, all of it. And Moiraine tells Rand that the truth is that he did not defeat the Dark One, he just set his lieutenant Ishmael free, and she mentions that Ishmael is the leader of the Forsaken, not the strongest, not the most formidable, the leader of the Forsaken, which is a little bit different, quite a bit different from the books, at least until the Nay Bliss is introduced. She says that Ishmael is the leader of the Forsaken and he has released Lanfear, and if he releases them all, then they have no hope of winning the last battle. Now, I'm going to pause on commentary here because I want to see how the rest of the season develops, but as book readers, we know that that is not true. Even as a show viewer, you can probably guess that that is not true, that releasing them all is something that will happen, and it will not mean the ultimate end of the show, like they lost in the last battle has been won for the dark. If that was the case, I would expect Ishmael's main goal to be to just release all the other Forsaken, since he had absolutely zero trouble doing it with Lanfear. Why wouldn't he just do it with all of them? There is a scene where they have a conversation about the Forsaken, so we'll save some commentary for that scene, but from Moraine's perspective, she thinks that's the worst thing that can happen, which you would think would propel her to try to solve that problem, but for right now, they're just trying to survive, and this scene was fun to watch despite it having, some quibbles and foibles in terms of plotting and stakes and direction. We then go back to a scene with Perrin, and although this scene is a lot slower than the chase with Lanfear in the woods, a lot of setup was dropped in this scene. So first, Perrin is informed through sendings from Hopper that Uno's body is in the town, which leads Perrin to sneak into the town by boat, I think. That part was a little confusing. And he is, creeping up to Uno and wondering who put him in the cage. Was it the White Cloaks or was it the Seanchan? Because this little town has since been commandeered by White Cloaks, which they communicate in conversation, but as a viewer, I think it would have been more interesting to see the White Cloak legions overtake the town right after the Seanchan raid it, but that's a quibble. At any rate, Perrin meets Aviendha in this scene, and this is a scene reminiscent from The Dragon Reborn when Perrin meets Gaul, and I know there's been speculation among book readers that this means that Gaul won't be in the story, and I'm sorry to tell you, but that's probably the case. It is possible they could introduce Gaul later as a character that goes with Perrin back to the Two Rivers to stop some terrorizations that are happening at the hands of the White Cloaks, but it's also possible that they could just leave Gaul out of the story. As much as I like him as a character, he is not essential to the plot, especially if they're going to totally reimagine it. So we get Aviendha in the cage instead, and this is a type of change that I'm fine with as a book reader. I think it was okay to do this. I understand the rationale. We are also introduced to Dane Bornhald in this episode. We are introduced to his father, Geofram Bornhald, in a previous episode, and now we are seeing his son, who is a pretty boy in his White Cloak costume and is very evasive in what types of answers he is giving Perrin about why Aviendha is in this cage. They talk about the strangers, which are the Seanchan, and also do not provide a lot of information about that. Perrin keeps asking Dane Bornhald, what did the Aiel woman do? And he keeps being evasive that she was just kind of in the wrong place at the wrong time, and don't try to help her. There's a point where a dog comes up to Perrin and seems to, like, really like him for no reason, which I think is supposed to be part of his powers as a wolf brother in the TV show. And then Valda strolls in. So the dog was trying to warn Perrin maybe that Valda was there. Not sure. Perrin, at any rate, sees Valda from a distance and immediately gets up and asks for a room. Dane mentions that he notices that Perrin is from the Two Rivers, and they, like, mention the Two Rivers constantly in this episode, probably to help us understand that they're going to go there in a later episode. We learn through some background conversation that the White Cloaks took this town back from the Seanchan, that the townspeople preferred the Seanchan to the White Cloaks because the White Cloak questioners are more severe and more terrifying than the Seanchan were. This went really, really fast, though, and I would not be surprised if audiences didn't really pick up on it, because you're so focused on Perrin trying to evade Valda, and also coming down from the scene where Lanfear is chasing Rand and Moiraine in the woods. So your tension is there on that tension, and you're not really picking up on these world-building, setting, and plot things that are happening in the conversation of this particular scene. There's also a conversation between Dane Bornhald and Valda about what is happening in Falme that also went by really fast. So Valda says that the strangers, the Seanchan, have established a base in Falme and that he plans to push them back into the sea. And then he says to Dane that your father will not save you, and then Dane replies, don't worry, there are no wolves here. The kind of, like, bickering between them about what Valda is afraid of wolves and the petty hierarchy of the White Cloaks didn't interest me so much, but this commentary about the strangers have established a base in Falme and will push them back into the sea was a very important thing dropped in the middle of this conversation that I'm not sure was picked up on. So I'm hoping in later episodes that we actually see legions of White Cloaks and how big these armies are, because if this whole season is going to culminate in some kind of a confrontation between armies, it's really important to understand the size, positions, and objectives of the opposing forces. So then we go back to the Lanfear chase scene, and again, I like the structure of this because it is keeping the tension alive throughout the episode, but this is the part where Lanfear happens upon the woman who explains that Moiraine gave her the horses and told her to run them towards Tarvalin in order to trick Lanfear. And Lanfear asks whose idea was this, because I guess she would be offended if it was Rand's idea. And the woman says it's Moraine's idea, and Lanfear makes some commentary that Rand is still so young and she has to remember that. And then she also makes commentary that Moiraine is more ruthless than she imagined. And then she also says that they'll have to sleep eventually and she'll have them then. So this is, a series of things showing that Lanfear is giving forgiveness to Rand because she's in love with Lews Therin. She is targeting Moiraine as somebody who has insulted and tricked her, and that she has another card up her sleeve after having lost them in this midnight chase. And so then this peasant woman says, I won't tell anyone, and Lanfear responds by saying, I know you won't, and then her mouth is sewn shut. I don't know how this is done with the one power. I guess it doesn't really matter, but it wasn't as effective to me as what Lanfear did before with the head popping of the other man that she killed, and I neglected to comment on that, but that was a actually scary thing to see her do with the power, although I would have appreciated it more if the lash of air that I think she had used was shown to go out and actually cut his head off, because later in the series, if we have people cutting flows, it would be important to understand how you prevent her from doing something like that to you if you can channel. But these are quibbles. The sewing of the mouth shut did kind of strike me as something that would be more likely to be seen in a show like Harry Potter as opposed to The Wheel of Time, but it's a quibble. At least it was interesting to watch. It does make me wonder, could she just cut her mouth open again? Can you fix that with surgery? Not really sure, but also not super important. Oh, and then one silly thing that does happen in this scene is that Lanfear keeps riding past the woman, and the question I have is, where are you going now? Because you were just informed that Rand and Moiraine are not actually headed towards Tarvalin, that they went the other way, and they don't have horses and you do. But for some reason, she rides on as opposed to going back along the road to see if she can pick up their trail or whatever. It ends up not being important, but it's just one of those like fine details which, if you're paying attention, does kind of strike the watcher as not very logical in the moment. I also don't like that Moiraine uses this peasant woman as bait in the show. Moiraine from the books would never do that, but Moiraine from the show isn't very likable, so I guess she does. The next scene takes place in the White Tower, and if you are someone who hasn't read the books and you are trying to avoid spoilers, this is a section to maybe skip. So in the White Tower, we are now following Verin Sedai of the Brown Ajah. We see her arrive at the tower and then go to the tower libraries to reconnect with her Brown Ajah sisters. One thing I did really like about the scene is how likable the Brown Ajah is. In the books, you don't really get a lot of them, and you certainly don't get this level of nerdy camaraderie that is portrayed in the show. And it was refreshing, it was cute, it was a little CW-y, but I still liked it overall, and I especially like seeing Katie Leung, who plays Cho Chang in the Harry Potter movies, now among the Brown Ajah. It's a very short scene, we'll come back to it in a minute, and more spoilers abound there. One thing I did pick up on is that the names of these two Brown Ajah sisters in the tower are Naomi and Yasika. I do not remember Aes Sedai of either of those names in the books. Now, there are a lot of Aes Sedai in the book, so I may just have forgotten them, but I do think it curious that they would make up new Aes Sedai characters, if that is in fact what they did, when there are so many to potentially have picked from, even if they changed which Ajah they are in, which wouldn't matter that much. But still, overall, this scene is cute, in part, I think, because the actress who plays Verin today is very formidable on screen. So then we have a scene which I think might be the worst scene of this episode, and this is with Liandrin and Nynaeve, Egwene, and Elaine captive in the ways. In this scene, Nynaeve wakes up and Liandrin is sitting there, and they realize that they're in the ways, they're going somewhere. They don't ask the questions that I would think you would ask as captives in that situation. What did you do to us? Where are we going? What's gonna happen to us? Instead, Nynaeve says that you attacked us with the one power. How did you do that? They have this conversation about the 3 oaths and how Liandrin has, broken them before without explaining the mechanism for how or why. She mentioned the Great King, which I assume to be Arthur Hawkwing, who threatened to burn the tower to the ground if the Aes Sedai didn't swear the 3 oaths, and this re-mentioning of the 3 oaths is useful, I think, for this season, but probably could have been worked into another scene better than in this scene. It just felt like this is an unnatural conversation for them to be having at this moment. Then Nynaeve pivots and starts asking Liandrin whether she was recruiting her for the dark or for him rather than the Red Ajah. It's like this, oh my god, oh-ha moment. And again, I think that's a great revelation for Nynaeve to have, but I think it could have also been had when she's with Elaine in a later season or even in a later episode. This whole scene just felt weird to me. And the reason that they didn't have Liandrin bring the girls along the ways in the same way that she does in the books, I think, was to have this scene. And I just don't feel like it's justified. It just felt a little clumsy to me. And even their emphasis on why people go to the dark wasn't very moving to me. I understand what they're trying to do by making dark friends more sympathetic, but I personally would have preferred if they kept some dark friends pretty straightforward, narcissistic, petty people, and then have some other ones that have some more complicated reasons for why they make those decisions, like, spoiler, Ingtar is in the books. All this focus on Liandrin's son dying at 80 years old being the reason that she's betrayed her sisters and her calling and turned to the dark doesn't really ring true for me. And even Nynaeve says, was your prize worth all of this? Or pride? And I just don't think it is. So I don't know. This this particular scene for me doesn't really work, aside from the fact that Kate Fleetwood is doing an amazing job playing Liandrin, and some of the other things that happen later are still at least aligned with the book, but I don't know, this scene was one of the weaker ones for me. Then we have a scene with the High Lady Suroth and Ishmael, and I think that this scene is very confusing for book readers, but I have to hold judgment and commentary on its details until we see how the whole season wraps up. In this scene, Ishmael confronts the High Lady Suroth, who, again, had her nails clipped off, hacked off with the sword in the opening scene of this episode, and he asks if she's finished pouting, and she's very angry because she tells him that he was the one who wanted to go to that backwater fishing village all for some Ogier and a wolf brother, and she wants to kill Turok and just be done with it. So this is setting up that the High Lady Suroth sees a pathway to advancement for herself by just overthrowing Turok and taking over the Forerunners, and Ishmael is kind of getting in her way at this point. He tells her, but wouldn't that throw us into a civil war, and comments on her stupidity and her temper. And she reminds him that he needs her legions and ships, that he is there at her invitation because he needs her armies in order to, presumably, conquer these lands. And Ishmael responds that he knows why she swore her oath to the dark, and that makes her shut up and to say, I forget myself. And then he responds that the last battle will be fought here above the city. The dragon will join us, and then announces that he has a gift for her. There's a lot happening in this scene that is, for a book reader, fundamentally confusing, but is hard to comment on without knowing how this season wraps up. I see potential problems which might be resolved in a rewriting of the ending and overall direction that the books take compared to the TV show, but it's just really hard to say. I suspect that I'm going to have some thoughts about how this logically doesn't make sense by the end of the season, but I'm just going to hold it until we see what happens. So that potentially very problematic scene is followed up by one of the best scenes in this episode. That is where Perrin frees Aviendha. And although Aviendha does not look like the character that is described in the books, I love her introduction. I think I'm going to love her as a character. I do feel for book readers that feel that she's stealing Gaul's scene here, and that's just, another time that a woman is stealing a scene from a man, but I really do think that this rewrite is a workable thing for how you have to condense the TV show in comparison to the books. Perrin frees Aviendha, they have a conversation, and then Dane Bornhald shows up with a dozen other White Cloaks and announces that they're going to have to take her on all at once, because if they go in one by one, she'll be able to defeat them. This is supposed to make you think that Aviendha is, a little bit in trouble if they all gang up on her, but of course we know that that's not going to be the case. It is very cute when Perrin steps in front of her as if to, protect her from the soldiers, and she kind of laughs a little bit and then steps in front of him and veils herself and asks if he likes to dance. This was reminiscent of the scenes that happen in the book, so I liked it. I'm not really sure why Dane Bornhald cares so much, though. From a logical perspective, although I loved this scene and how fun it was as an introduction to Aviendha, Dane Bornhald should just be like, whatever, and Aiel escaped. let her go. Why is she important to him? I'm not sure why he's willing to risk the lives of a dozen men trying to recapture an Aiel woman that he only caught by chance in the first place because she was in the wrong place at the wrong time, unless she did something more terrible that we just don't know yet. I also wonder if she did do something more terrible and there was more of a reason to be holding her in the town that he's just not telling Perrin what it is. Why was a guard not posted to watch her? You would think that they would do that, especially since Perrin made it clear that he was uncomfortable with her being in the cage. Dane Bornhald should have thought, maybe I should put a guard on her in case Perrin tries to spring her. And then Perrin would have to overcome the guard before setting her free. And them overcoming the guard may give the White Cloaks more incentive to attack them because one of their own was injured or killed in this jailbreak exercise. But these are quibbles. The fight scene was fun. It was a little Marvel-y in kind of how it works out. There were definitely some Black Widow vibes with how Aviendha was taking on all of these soldiers, with swords while she is weaponless, but it was fun. If I have a quibble about this scene, it's really about what Perrin is doing during most of this fight. I think we see him use a hammer, in the background against some of the White Cloaks, but most of the camera work is focused on Aviendha, and this is only relevant if it turns out that this fight is replacing the one that takes place against the White Cloaks in the Eye of the World, and this is the reason that Dane Bornhald starts targeting Perrin as a presumed dark friend and murderer of White Cloaks. I don't think we actually see Perrin murder any White Cloaks. All we do see is him tell Aviendha not to murder Dane Bornhald. So that could have been clarified a little bit more, especially if this is going to lead to the Two Rivers storyline and potentially the trial that happens in the books. And if that's the case, it makes me feel like Perrin murdering his wife in episode 1 was even more unnecessary than has already been discussed. So then we cut back to a scene with Moiraine and Rand arriving in Cairhien. And Moiraine feels hunted. She says, we're here for a very short time. We're just going to get some clothes and get out. And Rand thinks, well, maybe we should stop somewhere and rest because they've been running all night. And Moiraine objects that they can't go to sleep because Lanfear is a master of Tel'aran'rhiod, the world of dreams. As a book reader, I noted that this exchange is a little off. In the books, Tel'aran'rhiod is not something that Moiraine really has heard of, at least I don't think so. Egwene is exposed to it in book 3. It eventually becomes a pretty core part of the story, but the Forsaken are well versed in Tel'aran'rhiod, but it's not something that Aes Sedai really remember or are aware of. That being said, Moiraine does know that dreams are dangerous, and she does ward her dreams. I don't know if warding is a thing in the show, but it would help if we knew, because that is something that they could do to evade Lanfear at that point. Now, if every Aes Sedai in the TV show knows what Tel'aran'rhiod is, and warding dreams is impossible or just not a skill that they have anymore, that makes Moraine's refusal to explain the danger of dreams to the boys in season 1 even more infuriating, because she would have had the secret knowledge that the Forsaken or forces of the dark can attack people in their dreams, and she didn't explain that to them. I would think that that would make her an even more suspicious character to Rand in particular right now, who has been tormented in his dreams for many episodes in both the TV show as well as in the books. But let's just set that aside, since we already know that Moraine's kind of an unlikable character in the TV show version of events. Moving on, they go to her sister's house, which seems like a suspect place to go, and Moiraine does comment to her sister that she didn't necessarily make the best decision there, since it puts them all at risk. Absolutely does. But she goes home, essentially to Cairhien, and her nephew Barthanes is there, and he has very silly looking hair and is very excited about marrying the Queen of Cairhien, which is a king in the book series, but honestly that didn't bother me that much, other than that they have removed from the story, at least in a material way, the game of houses. Instead, we have the House Damodred marrying into House Rhiannon through Barthanes and his engagement to the queen, upon which he would become the king consort. So, okay, that's like one of the changes that can kind of make sense for the TV show. I don't hate it, but just kind of noting that that was something that they did. I didn't comment on this in the last episode, but Moraine's age to me in this TV show is very problematic, and I don't know why they're prioritizing it so much. They seem to want to go out of their way to make us understand that Aes Sedai aging is kind of a sad thing that happens to them, and it creates all of this tragedy in their lives, and they've changed the whole historical timeline of the story in order to make Moiraine like 90 years old or something because her little sister is 70 something. And she says at the very beginning of the show in season 1, episode 1, that she's been looking for the Dragon Reborn for 20 years, which means she's been doing that since she was 70 years old. I don't remember if she says that she wasn't accepted at the time that she heard the prophecy, but if she was, she's a very old accepted in the TV show. And it's not bad necessarily, but I just don't know why they went out of their way to change this. The reason seems very immaterial to me, and it causes a lot of problems with the timeline because of how intertwined Moiraine's family and her upbringing in the White Tower is with the prophecy, with Rand's age, with the Aiel War, with her uncle cutting down the tree. Like, all those things are connected, and so changing her age causes these ripple effects that make it very hard to understand what else has been changed significantly in the story. But show watchers are not going to pick up on these details. It's just something I think that's annoying to book readers, and I'm sure that the writers are counting on that. But anyway, I liked seeing Barthanes in this scene. Although the details are different, this conflict is in the books, and I can kind of see where it's going, and I'm happy to get any parts of the book in the TV show, even if they are rearranged from what I remember. So then we move back to Verin in the White Tower, and she is trying to track down where Nynaeve and Egwene have gone off to, because no one seems to know where they are, including the Mistress of Novices. And the direction and acting of the scene, you can tell that Verin knows more than she lets on, and she's putting up a front. I don't know how many TV viewers are able to suspect that Verin knew something before she even talked to Sheriam, but it's pretty obvious for book readers. Hi, sweetie. What's going on here? Verin meets with her Brown Ajah sisters and reveals that she is suspicious about the location of Egwene and Nynaeve, and they hatch this plan to go look at the Mistress of Novices book and see what kind of entry she made and analyze it. And Katie Young's character, Yasika, mentions that she has an eidetic memory, which is so overused in television. There is such a small percentage of the population that actually has that. It would not be something necessarily that it would even recognize as a thing in this universe, but it's convenient for this particular plotline. So she's able to analyze the writing and just glance at it, and from memory be able to tell that it was written in a trance-like state or by someone else's hand, and they deduce that it must have been a weave of compulsion, which leads Yasika to thinking that there is a Black Sister or Black Ajah in the White Tower. There's also mention of Elaine's brother Gawain in this scene, which might mean that we get to see him as a character, if not in this season, in a subsequent season. I do have some concerns about these Brown Ajah sisters that Verin brings into this little espionage scheme, because it's very dangerous to them to be involved in this. I'm very worried that Cho Chang is going to get murdered in the Wheel of Time TV show. That being said, this scene was pretty cute. It was fun to see the Brown Ajah participate in this kind of espionage activity, despite that typically being something that the Blue Ajah does in the books. It still kind of worked within this context, and I do think that those Aes Sedai characters are some of the more likable ones that we've been introduced to, so it's nice to see at least some likable Aes Sedai in this TV show. We then cut to Liandrin emerging from the Waygate with her captives, Nynaeve, Egwene, and Elaine, who, not uncoincidentally, Verin is looking for in the previous scene, and where it is dropped that the Black Ajah might be in the tower. So TV viewers are able to ascertain that Liandrin is probably Black Ajah, but they might believe that she is the only Black Sister in the tower. Seeing Liandrin emerge from the Waygate leading 3 horses with bodies on the horses just re-emphasizes to me how silly that scene in the middle of this is, because it would have been so much easier logistically for Liandrin to lead the girls through the ways while awake and betray them once they are through the Waygate when they don't know what's happening, again, like happens in the books. But it's a quibble, because I do enjoy seeing more of the scenes from the books come alive, even if it's done differently and in some ways in a more inferior way. Liandrin emerges from the Waygate and she has this conversation with the High Lady Suroth, which is full of tension as one of them believes that all Aes Sedai should be on leashes, and Liandrin believes that High Lady Suroth will kneel to her someday. This was excellent to keep within the production because it does reveal to audience viewers that there are contentions and arguments between dark friends. Like, it has been established that High Lady Suroth is a dark friend working with Ishmael, and Liandrin is a dark friend of the Black Ajah, but they do not have the same allegiances and they do not have the same goals, even though they are both working for the same person. I think that was an excellent thing to get across in the TV show, and this scene does that pretty effectively with the dialogue, most of which is directly from the books, although not all of it. Anyway, this conversation with High Lady Suroth rubs Liandrin the wrong way, and as she is leaving, she cuts the bonds that are holding Nynaeve and the girls captive. Now, I have some quibbles with this scene. I think it was done better in the books. It's close enough that I still enjoyed watching it, but in the ways Liandrin said that you are shielded and bound, and I have a question about where did the shield go? Because immediately upon her cutting their bonds with air, Nynaeve, Egwene, and Elaine are all able to channel, because I assume Liandrin dropped the shield that she had on them, blocking them from the One Power, but you would think that once they were through the Waygates, that the Soldam would immediately have taken those shields over and, double shielded them at this time. And they instead just, bring them out, wait for them to wake up, give them a chance to get on their feet before they even start attacking. And shields aren't the first thing they do, which does not seem very realistic. I'd have to reread this section in the books because I don't remember it page for page, but I want to say when they emerge from the ways in the books, Egwene is immediately collared. She doesn't even know what's going on. It's put something on her throat, and she's like, and then learns later what it is, whereas Nynaeve and Elaine get free in a flurry of things happening, in part because I think they weren't expecting Elaine, so that gave them a little bit of an edge. They only had 2 Adam ready, and Nynaeve, being as powerful as she was, couldn't be blocked by the Soldam, so she was able to embrace the source and call, lightning from the skies to aid in her escape, whereas Egwene was taken captive, immediately upon exiting the Waygate. So this version of the story just feels a little clunky to me in terms of, the competence of the Seanchan in trying to hold on to these novice girls and one accepted who barely know how to channel and can't even embrace the One Power without a lot of luck and effort. So I also didn't like how the chase scene worked out. So like in the books, all 3 of the girls try to run. In the books, Egwene isn't able to run, but Elaine and Nynaeve run. In the TV show, all 3 of them start to run, and then they show later that Egwene was captured. But there's this point where Nynaeve and Elaine are running through the trees, which is, I don't know, just not very well shot. And then they burst through the trees and they just kind of stop. And they're like, oh, we escaped them. How far did you run? Did you run for miles? It felt like they ran, through a short grove and then just emerged on the other side and assume that they are now safe and then realize that Egwene was captured. And I don't know what to chalk this up to, if it was just poor filming, not a very good location. It felt a little like a scene taken out of Jurassic Park, but redone with Damani chasing them instead of dinosaurs. I don't know, just something about the scene was clunky to me. I liked that it was from the book, so I enjoyed it overall, but it wasn't one of the best filmed or produced scenes from the episode. And like I mentioned, some of the logistics around how the Soldam were prepared to take these girls captive just seemed lacking to me in the way that the show chose to do it. So then we cut back to another scene with Perrin and Aviendha, which was a world-building scene for the Aiel that I really liked. So this isn't in the books, but the dialogue is in the books. So I'm trying to remember exactly where this takes place. In the TV show, Perrin and Aviendha are, having a rest, and she is explaining the threefold land, the Aiel, that she is searching for the Cairhien, the chief of chiefs, that she has Toh, what Giotto is to the Aiel, that he saved her life and so her water is his. And most of this is taken from, I want to say, a conversation that an Aiel named Urien has when he emerges from the rocks when the Shinarans are traveling after the horn and encounter Aiel on the road, and he makes some of this commentary to them, and that's our first introduction to Aiel in the books. Also, in this way, we just have a more major character sharing this information, and I think the context is better. So this is one of those scenes in the TV show that I actually think is better than the books. Doesn't happen that often, but I really liked the scene. I also really liked the flirtation that Aviendha has toward Perrin, with her commenting that she's not going to attack him in a fit of lust, but that, you know, she wouldn't be opposed if they decide to go that route. Instead, Perrin asks that she accompany him to Falme because he is trying to rescue his friends, or at least find out what happened to them. But remember, the Loyal is still captive, Ingtar is still captive, the other Shinarans are still captive, and Perrin has made this choice as a character with agency to go after his friends, that the humans that he was traveling with are his packs as opposed to the wolves. So Perrin is making some choices here, and Aviendha is now along for the ride, and I didn't dislike this scene. Again, I think because it pulls from dialogue in the books, even if it is remixed in a way that makes sense for how the plot is progressing in the TV show. I'm sure some people are wondering why there's this emphasis of Rand's future girls being more acquainted or even set up with the other characters. So far we have seen Aviendha and Perrin flirting. We've also seen Min and Mat flirting, and I actually don't think that this means anything. I think that the show writers are trying to show that Rand has a number of options for partners in the future who come recommended from different friends that he has. So Elaine and Egwene are friends, Min and Mat are friends, and Aviendha and Perrin are friends. So all three of these girls will be recommended to Rand by someone that he trusts from his hometown. I think that's where they're going with this. I don't think they're setting up love triangles with the other characters, although they might be giving a nod to that in a fanficky kind of way, but we'll see. We're a ways from actually seeing that play out. Anyway, we then have a scene with Nynaeve and Elaine making their way through the town of Falme, trying not to get caught by the Seanchan, and Nynaeve is so insufferable in this scene. Now, I get that Nynaeve is occasionally insufferable in the books, especially the early books, but if memory serves, it is actually Nynaeve's plan and Nynaeve's boldness and Nynaeve's ingenuity and strategy that leads to the eventual, spoilers, attempt to rescue Egwene from the Seanchan. And in this version of the story, Nynaeve is just all bluster and fear and stupidity. And although I like that emphasizes the value that Elaine brings to this little duo, because they are going to spend quite a bit of time together in the story if the plot is in any way similar to the books, it is kind of hard watching Nynaeve just be so frustrating as a character. Obviously, they need to blend in more. Obviously, Elaine is not just putting on princess airs when she says that they have to change their clothes. She mentions that the invaders are a people that she doesn't recognize. They could have emphasized the importance of that even more, since as daughter heir of Andor, she would be familiar with all of the different cultures of the land, whereas Nynaeve's experience is more limited. And then this scene unfortunately ends in a very silly way with this warder kind of just like shoving them into the wall, and they just fall limp and go unconscious. This was very silly. It's one of those like conceits of cheaply written television that people can just fall unconscious like with the snap of the fingers, and that's not how that works. That would be very, very bad if they were actually like had their heads slammed hard enough against the wall that they went unconscious. So this could have been directed better. The warder could have put a hand over their mouth, whispered into their ear, "I'm a warder, I'm here with the Aes Sedai, we're here to help." Something, anything better than what they actually did. But it doesn't ruin the episode for me. It's just one of those areas of opportunity where I can see improvement, and I wonder why something like that wasn't caught in the script. Then we go back to the White Tower where Liandrin has returned from the way gates and she runs into Verin and they have this conversation about asparagus, and Verin is noting that Liandrin has gone out of her way to give herself an alibi for why she was out of the tower, that she came back with vegetables that can only be got in some other location, and Verin makes note of this like very obviously in the conversation, which to me is talking down to the audience in an unnecessary way. It's part of that kind of CW vibe that the TV show veers into sometimes, where it's, you know, taking something like subterfuge and making it very, very obvious for the audience. The problem with this is that it should tip off Liandrin too. She should be like, why are you so interested in my asparagus? Why are you almost like threatening me with where I was in the tower? And because she knows she's guilty about something, that should cause her some trepidation. Now, they might just be setting up for, you know, what happens in book 3 with Liandrin, and, you know, Cho Chang might get murdered, but the back and forth here just felt a little bit on the nose for me. It didn't feel like a very safe way to root out who is doing what and what is going on. I do think, however, that this scene was an effective way to showcase that Verin is someone that we should trust as an audience, and especially for people who haven't read the books. You trust Verin as a reader in the books because she is on the side of Rand and doesn't reveal his identity, even though she guesses that he's the Dragon Reborn and is seen as one of those Aes Sedai who is not trying to imprison him, abuse him, or gentle him, but understands that he is this prophesized figure that has to do these important things, and she acts in concert with Moiraine in achieving that mission, so you trust her. In the TV show, they're going a little bit of a different route. Rather than having Verin be directly involved in whatever the show is doing with Rand, she is more involved with this hunt for Black Sisters that becomes a secondary plotline, which she also is in the books, just in a later books. They're kind of jumping there a little bit sooner. Some of the things that happen in the Dragon Reborn or hinted at happening in the background of the Dragon Reborn are happening more obviously on screen for readers, and I think that was okay. It just felt a little CW cheesy for me in how some of the dialogue played out. So then we have a scene with Moiraine, and I don't like Moiraine's character in the TV show. I prefer her much more in the books, but I do love Rosamund Pike's portrayal of her in her acting. We have this scene with Moiraine losing confidence and pretending that she is more confident than she is, but really feeling all of these fears and doubts and indecision about what to do next. Lanfear is chasing them. She's putting on a show for Rand that she knows what to do, but in actuality, she is lost. And her sister comes and talks to her, and they have a conversation about how Moiraine gave her advice long ago that when you don't know what to do or you're not sure, you need to ask this question of, is it true? Is it true beyond doubt that Rand in this situation needs your protection? And Moiraine has this revelation that protection is not what she can provide Rand, and that should be obvious. Even if she wasn't stilled or tied off from the One Power or whatever is going on there, she is not powerful enough to protect Rand from Lanfear, who is actively chasing them both in the real world and also in their dreams, or will be able to get them, whatever Moiraine thinks that means, in their dreams. So presumably this is where Moiraine has the revelation that Rand needs advice and guidance rather than manipulation and stonewalling. But I just dislike her character in the TV show because although Moiraine is somewhat austere and not forthcoming in the books with Rand early in the series, she is fundamentally nicer, kinder, wiser, smarter, and more strategic. So taking away all of that and replacing it with this woman who lacks confidence, who lacks wisdom, who isn't being strategic, who isn't being smart, who spurned land and ran to Cairhien to try to save Rand with her wits and a knife, is just not making me like her character. And at the end of this episode, she comes up with this plan for Rand, which we'll save when we get there and also see how it plays out in the next episode. But I just feel like Moiraine can't be saved as a character at this point, and I'm looking forward to the eventual plotline where she is killed off in the show. I think it'll happen a little differently. It might be in the next season rather than like a season 4, because I suspect we're going to get large chunks of the Shadow Rising in the next season, but we'll have to wait and see. Just, yeah, Moiraine, I'm sorry. You're not my favorite character in the TV show. And then we have a fascinating scene with Lanfear and Ishmael in Teleran Riyadh. And this starts up with Lanfear pretending to be Rand sleeping, and Ishmael, touches her face and cups her face, and then is like, surprise, I know it's you. And she's like, oh, you've gotten better. And he says, subtlety has never really been your strength, which, yes, it has for Lanfear in the TV show, or in the books. But overall, the scene was interesting. It's setting up a lot of lore changes for the TV show in opposition to the books, but it left me feeling interested. It doesn't mean that I'm going to like what they end up doing, but I was interested with what I heard and what I saw in this scene. First of all, Lanfear, is portrayed as a much younger looking woman in the books. In the TV show, she's older looking. And I think when she is paired with Ishmael, that makes more sense. Having someone in her early 20s with this much older man in this room would have a very different vibe. So that might have been part of the reason why she looks a bit older in the TV show. And I think it's fine, especially if they're merging her character with Semirog, which I do think that they are doing. In this scene is when we see all of the remaining seals for the Forsaken. And the reason that I think that Semirog and Lanfear have been merged is because they have this conversation about Moghedien and Greendale and the boys. And we know from episode 5 of season 1 where Steppen is like caressing the Forsaken statues, which like I don't even know why those are in the White Tower, but when he's looking at those, I think there's 8 of them. And so if you do some quick math, you can determine that the only remaining girls in the show are going to be Moghedien and Greendale. Semirog is merged with Lanfear. Missana will be merged with either Greendale or Moghedien, and Halima will be merged with whichever one Missana is not merged with. So that's the girls, and then the boys are the remaining male Forsaken that we haven't yet met. This is just a guess, but I think Agenor is cut, Bethalmil is cut, Bilal is cut, and we're going to end up with 4 boys who are going to be Ravin, Samael, Tamandred, and possibly Asmodean. Maybe. They could swap someone in or out there, but that interests me. It's actually more of the Forsaken than I thought we were going to get. Plus Ishmael. And there are some other things in the scene that happened or were talked about that were really interesting. So Ishmael tells Lanfear that there is a reason that the Great Lord of the Dark woke him first and speaks only to him, and that is because he believes in the dark, that he wants to stop all of the suffering, stop everything. And Lanfear asks, well, why release me? And he says it's because he knows what it is that she wants, what she's always wanted. She wants Theron or Rand. And that implies that he doesn't know what the other Forsaken want, or at least fears that they will be harder to control, because they do have a conversation where Lanfear says, aren't you worried that I might betray you? And there is some question there as to whether she might. So we are going to get a course correction here from what I said in a previous review, where it seemed like all of the Forsaken are working together, and it does seem like this is laying the foundation for that not being the case, which would be more accurate to the book. So I liked this scene for that reason. We also get a little bit of Ishmael's plan, which is harder to comment on at this point. I think it'll be easier at the end of season 2, but he does make some statements about how the friends of Rand are all being positioned to potentially join the Dark. So Egwene has been collared by the Seanchan. Perrin is with the wolves and might turn wolfish or turn feral or wild or whatever it is that he means by that. Matt was born mine, meaning I guess because he was born into poverty, that means he is a villainous character, which I don't agree with, but I do think that Ishmael will end up being wrong about some of these things. And this implication is that if any one of these ta'veren characters turn to the dark, it will like force the pattern or force the wheel into pushing Rand into the dark or something like that. It's a little unclear, but I'm at least interested in whatever this plan is, and it's nice to get something like this in season 2 so that we can start understanding how this conflict is going to play out and what the stakes are. So then there's a second half to this scene, which I didn't like quite as well, but this is where Ishmael wakes up or is woken up by one of the Seanchan lackeys and is told that he is being requested to stand before Turok for an audience. And I just found this conversation awkward. The information was interesting. The placement in the story felt forced. So Turok is saying, you are not of the blood or even of our land, and yet you've moved up quickly into our society. You were the first to see the omens that triggered the return. So all of this is to say that Ishmael is behind it all. He is the Palpatine of this conflict and has been orchestrating things behind the scenes to get the Seanchan to invade the mainland. But I found this hard to believe. I think the information was interesting, but I was just doing some calculations in my head of it's been 5 months or maybe a little bit more than that, and that doesn't seem like enough time to have done all of this. And even if it was enough time to do all of this with traveling and compulsion and other tools that Forsaken have at their disposal, I feel like Turok would not be questioning it now. He might have questioned it 3 months ago before the ships took off from Seanchan to invade the mainland, but it seems like a weird thing to bring up now. So this feels a little bit of just like shoehorning information to the audience at this stage about how Ishmael is behind it all. And it's not terrible, it's just a little bit trite. It's a little bit CW-y. It requires the audience to suspend their disbelief that all of this orchestration was possible in the timeline that we have been given, which I just question and don't feel is great writing. It's okay, but it's not great. And since Turok is a believer in the hierarchies and dynasty of his land, Ishmael assuages his concern by just saying the Empress can see and know the omens for what they are, and that satisfies Turok's curiosity about all of this, and he is very pleased with the Horn of Valir. He says, you have earned my notice with this. You may ask one thing of me. And for some reason, Loyal is standing there, and I don't know why. But then Ishmael says, the High Lady has a gift for you, which turns out to be Egwene. And then we have a short scene where Nynaeve and Elaine wake up from where they were, rendered unconscious, and they're in some kind of room in Falme or perhaps in one of the ships near Falme. I'm not exactly sure about their location, but they are in the company of Rima, who is an Aes Sedai, as well as her warder. And if you don't remember, Rima is a character from the books. She was the Aes Sedai that had been taken by the Seanchan before Elaine was taken and had started answering to the new name they gave her, which was Pura. And finding that out diminishes Egwene's confidence that she will ever be rescued. Again, that's in the books. In the TV show, it looks like we are going to meet Rima and get to see her before presumably she is also taken or killed or whatever variation happens in this version of the tale. So then we're back to Ishmael and his gift of Egwene being presented by the High Lady Suroth. She's just a Damani, so I don't know why all the pomp and circumstance with, this particular capture, but I guess it's important for the plot. They collar her, which I was happy to see collars. I was less excited to see the collars be so obviously magical, where it, expands into a kind of neck or chest plate, and then the leash itself going to the Saldam to the Adam is like a piece of magic that is stringing them together. And the reason I didn't like that is because it implies that the Saldam are using magic, which undermines the whole concept of how this society is structured within Seanchan, because the Seanchan in the books believe that the women who control the leashes can't channel, that they just have a certain affinity with this like object that's manufactured in their land. And so that very obviously magical connection undermines that, and I'm not sure if the story is telling it differently or if this is just another one of those details that was poorly thought out. So we'll have to wait and see on that. So at this point, we've heard the evil plot of our villains. We are seeing that they are kind of winning, at least halfway measures at this point in the story. And then their last scene is Moiraine having a plan. So Moiraine says that they're staying after all in Cairhien, and Rand fears falling asleep because Lanfear will find him, and then he realizes that Moiraine wants him to be found, and they have this discussion about how Lanfear kind of trusts him, or at least doesn't want to hurt him, that if she had wanted to hurt him, she would have done it in the 2 or 3 months that they were dating in the town. And so Moiraine finally explains that Lanfear loved the Dragon Reborn before he met his wife, and that she swore her oath to the dark in order to get him back. And that was pretty accurate to the books. And then Rand says, and you want her to think that she has. You want me to pretend to be in love with the Forsaken. And he says it'll never work. And Moiraine says it may not have to work, or at least not for very long. We can just use this as a trick to find out what she wants or what Ishmael wants. And they argue about it, but Moiraine says it's your choice and that she means it that time, and that she will watch over him while he's sleeping and wake him if he looks like he's in distress. So Rand agrees to this plan, and then we see this cut away where he is asleep in Tel'aran'rhiod or a dream bubble or something, tied to a giant wheel, and Lanfear is wearing this very, like, kind of silly dominatrix outfit, which again implies that she's supposed to be partially Semirog, and she's smiling at him with this like victorious smirk. And that's the end of the episode. So you might wonder, because I have given so many critiques of this episode, why I think it is one of the better ones. And it really just boils down to there's more content from the books in this episode than there have been in other episodes. In episode 5 of season 1, there was no content from the books. We just came out of episode 4, which, despite its exciting ending, for me, had a lot of wasted time with Lan having picnics with Alana's warders in some unknown location and just things moving very slowly. So I was excited to see some of the focus of the story come back in this particular episode. It was more exciting, it was more structured, it had more better stakes that were laid out and understood, and I can see it starting to get to an ending that might be somewhat reminiscent of the ending in The Great Hunt. I still don't think that the TV show is as good as the books, and I don't know why they made as many changes as they did, thinking that they were better writers or that this would be a better way to portray it. But I do enjoy the show when it is somewhat capturing the spirit of the story, and I feel like this episode did that better than a lot of other episodes have to date. I also, my bar has been lowered for this show, so I'm enjoying whatever good pieces I can get out of it, and hopefully the show will be successful enough that maybe, possibly, there will be some other kind of adaptation at some point in the future. It may not be live actors, but it would still be kind of fun to have some other kind of Wheel of Time telling that adheres to the original story a bit more closely. But I'm dreaming that may never happen. But even if it doesn't, I'm still happy that we're getting something, because it is bringing more people into this fandom, and that part at least is fun. I don't know if the next 3 episodes are going to be good or if they're going to start to fall apart, so we'll just have to wait and see. But Overall, I felt like this episode was at least rewatchable, and that's where my bar is right now for the show. If you have thoughts and comments, please leave them below. Obviously, it takes me a lot of time to do these things. I do apologize for the delay, but I'm looking forward to the end of the season and all of your thoughts, so let me know what you think.